Build versus buy in the age of AI. What's up now? You just said you rarely think of buy anymore.
For small stuff, like I don't even go look for software anymore. Much less go look for buying. And if I need to tie something together, I just get GPT to write the code for me.
Oh yeah, there was another thing we wanted to chat about was like those integration automation tools, things like N8N.
Yeah.
If this then that, is if this then that.
I think that was yeah. We have that on our list.
Might turn on a little screen share on this one as we jibber jabber through the stuff. If this still around, and you can hook all kinds of your stuff to all kinds of your other stuff. So does GPT know how to integrate IFT?
Maybe, probably. It knows a lot of things. I mean, it knows how the messages posted on the Samba are formatted without having to go look at them. It's not perfect.
Knows how the what's are worded?
The Samba, which is a VW forum. It's been around for a long time. It spun out from one of the communities I run.
Oh.
And I was like, I need to take this 147-page thread and turn it into something that I can feed back into ChatGPT to talk about, right? So I just had it write a tool to do that because I can.
Why would you do that? I mean, when I talk about build versus buy kind of stuff, I sort of think external services that you can do yourself now, GPT with lots of assistance if you're moderately good at stuff. A complicated one I've heard a rumor about, but I don't have the skill set necessary to, judge if it's working okay. But somebody, an SRE that I know is using the Kubernetes mechanisms in a cloud agnostic way, and he's been using GPT assistance to rig his shit together, let's say. And now instead of it being, I want my beefy PostgreSQL database with replication in multiple availability zones, that's now some magical, again, because it's, out of my depth of knowledge, some magical orchestration with his Kubernetes mechanism that is like, oh yes, well, we felt like that one was getting old, so now we're going to upgrade this rolling PG version update, and it's magically, through the scripts and the magical feature sets that Cube gives you, like, oh well, let's just run a little test over here.
So, I mean, that's a good example. So in systems and DevOps, and we often think about build versus buy when we talk about logging, we talk about monitoring systems, we talk about APM. We talk about database management. So do we use RDS or some other cloud database solution? Do we hand roll our own database solution with replication and failover and backups and restores? Because a database does not exist if it doesn't have backups and restores, right? It's not a database otherwise. So RDS integrates, for example, RDS, the one I'm most familiar with, integrates all of those features. You have ways to scale it, ways to manage upgrades, ways to manage backups, ways to manage restores. Somebody has built all the code around all of this and tested it extensively. Or you can build it yourself and learn how all of those systems tie together, which was how we did it before RDS. So we had to be experts in all those. And now the new model is this, right? So we don't have to learn it ourselves. We don't have to actually learn all of the pieces. We can just have GPT tie all the pieces together and write us some code.
Yeah, like I suppose, in this example, J, we'll just use the letter J to talk about this fella. So in J's circumstance, which now it sounds like it's his proper name, but it's not, just the letter J, Agent J, right? Knows that you need to do replication, knows that you need to do the thing, ready to go onto the system and manually put PG in there and then get it rigged together and edit the necessary configs. read all the documentation, do all the thing, do all the thing, do all the thing. Now it's, please give me the recipe for such and such. And I'm going to try that next, actually. Since I don't even know anything about, when I say I don't know anything about Kubernetes, I mean, I know generally what it does. And then maybe this would be another spot we could do a little experiment there. Read the transcript and analyze with OpenAI. Then add a key entry to a Google spreadsheet. It's harder to type when people are looking at me, even if it's just on the internet. Use the Zoom recording so it does know how to do this thing. Save your recording. Send yourself an email. A little bit of Python. I wonder, this thing like almost always defaults to making code for me in Python.
Yeah, it is best at writing Python. Everything else, it's worse at. That basically because it has a large corpus of Python to work from. It can do other things, and some things it can't do. Some things it will just make up. But Python is where it is kind of its expert zone, and it also has the ability to execute Python live inside an isolated sandbox environment. So it can run Python and produce images, produce results, as long as those results don't require reaching out to third-party services.
That's neat. So that was cool. It does know how to do IFT. Oh, I should have asked it how to do something else. Like, what do they call it? EC2 and what
Yeah,
I don't know their VM thing now.
I don't know what Google calls it. I'm sure it would know what you're talking about.
As far as we're gonna go. Let's see how smart this thing is. All of this seems to make sense. So how do I automatically make my PGs config know about each other? Put WireGuard between them? I mean, this is the kind of stuff you end up doing manually if you're not using this magic.
Yep.
You like a YAML example of this? Yeah, baby. Yeah, send me the YAMLs.
Still puts you way deep into debug land when you start implementing the solutions, though, right?
Apparently, you just take the debug spew and feed it back into here and say, oh, it didn't work for me, and here's what I'm seeing.
Right up until you get into the circular, you hit it's exhausted all of its ideas, and so the next idea is the first idea, and then it just keeps working through it, and if you're not paying attention, and I am guilty of this extremely, right? I'll just keep feeding it now, like, okay, feed it, and because I'm not looking at the results, I'm trying the results, right? In the ecosystem in the appropriate place where it's safe to do this, right? I wouldn't do this against production.
No, you run all this stuff in a testing environment.
In a testing ecosystem that I can absolutely completely destroy. And sometimes, because I'm doing this while I'm doing 5 or 6 other things in between conversations, whatever. And so I'll just take that output, feed it back. And I don't recognize until 3 or 4 times later that the changes it's making are the same changes it made last time. And so you end up just doing the same thing until you recognize, well, all right, now we've got to take a different approach. Let's inject some logging into this. Let's do something. Let's figure, let's isolate this down to a smaller problem set, whatever it is, and start working through it. My favorite tool is the one that I built to take Terraform's spew and feed it through, just pipe it directly through GPT and have it summarize it all and tell me what went wrong and what went right, and count up the number of resources that changed as a very simple summary, instead of me having to go read and look at all the spew. And then if what it says is, hey, there's a problem, then I can go look at it. But it's explained why there was a problem too. Manual setup. Can't we automate this?
So here I did, talk to me like I'm an idiot. How do I do that step by step? Like, I don't know anything about how to do this. I mean, I do know how to do this, but
right.
This is now.
It's sometimes good to revisit your something.
Days of possibly documentation reading, and is only in seconds. And what I'm replacing is, an RDS cost that is like 4x. I mean, this is what Agent J has told me is that this gives them the same, level of assurances that their stuff is going to stay on, because EC2 and these cloud instances are very, very reliable, and they're obviously more complicated than this example, gives them this instance is having a problem. Let's magically take it out of the loop and tell everybody to go over here, with a whole bunch of other orchestration shit that's involved in there, right?
It's interesting to hear that, right? Because say 10 years ago, we would have always considered that EC2 instances are unstable.
Wow, I mean,
and yet, but it's true. You can have 4 or 5 years uptime on an EC2 instance now. It's possible.
I don't mean to say that they're not like the same. They're the same level almost, I think, as if you managed a big ass data center with hell of servers in it. Shit crashes, drives fail all the time.
Exactly. Where it used to be expecting to lose an instance. If you had 10,000 instances, you would expect to lose an instance every couple of hours.
Right.
Right. And you don't have that expectation now, especially not if you're only running like 5 or 50.
Yeah. Or, you've got this mechanism that's just like, I have a thing here, you can, if you were so paranoid about things like this, you could like auto rotate your nodes in and out of this grouping with
right.
the way that the replicas can turn themselves on magically. It's less auto scaling and like more of a auto rotate.
Definitely in the buy versus build, right? Because we would build into data centers because we could build reliable, that we would get a couple of years of uptime other than the things that screwed up, but we could expect some consistency around it. We would break it, or, it would have, after 3-4 years, you would start to see real breakage. But now EC2 instances are reliable enough that we can just consider them to be in that same category of reliability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not 50%, it's like 90%.
Yeah.
And if you have your infrastructure rigged up with the necessary replications and the magic WireGuard VPN, which is tough to configure initially, you could just buy Tailscale, and with some finger wagging, Tailscale is just
WireGuard with a bunch of automation and UI around it. Yep.
Oh yeah, that just is doing a lot of work in there, but you can then none of it is like outside of, or at least from my understanding, none of it is outside of what you can now figure out how to rig up yourself. And then, oh crap, you have to maintain it. But oh crap, you have to maintain everything sort of anyway.
Everything you buy or build, you have to maintain. That's very true, right? And the 300% problem kicks in here a lot because
what problem?
The 300% problem.
300%.
So every single thing you use adds 300% of overhead of how much knowledge you have to have.
How do you get to 300?
There's a really good article about it, and I don't have it in front of me. But that idea is that, like, so if you want to use EC2, well, you need to, if you wanted to, okay, let's start it. I'm gonna run Linux on a machine.
Sure.
Under my desk, right? I need to understand the machine. I need to understand Linux. Now I want to run that same machine on an EC2 instance. Now I need to understand EC2, the machine, and Linux. But EC2 brings in a bunch more problems because I understand?
You know how to use the Amazon console and click through there, and then you'll want to make sure you know how to pick the right server size.
Everything starts to escalate.
Security group.
You now have to understand EC2 networking, VPC networking, all to and understand how to remotely access it, how to someone else from remotely accessing it. Because after all, I'm just replacing this tool that was sitting under my desk, and I already knew how to manage and access that, control access to it, right?
Sure.
And so every single thing, if we say, okay, now we're going to adopt the database, well, we can install the database on the EC2 instance. I have to understand how the database works, enough to get it running, enough to manage backups, enough to do all those things. Or I use RDS, where I have to understand less of how it runs, but I still need to understand. But now I have to learn a different service, how to use its UIs, how to use its APIs, how its configuration mechanisms work. Right? I don't just create I forget the Postgres version of it, but I don't create just a MySQL MySQL config file or Postgres config file and put it on the machine. I have to run it through UIs or APIs that align specifically to how RDS manages it. And so the amount of knowledge we pick up, then we're like, well, we're going to use Kubernetes on top of EC2. Well, we've still got to understand that. We've got to understand Kubernetes. We've got to understand using Postgres inside Kubernetes. We've got to understand Docker, right? And we just escalate. And all we were trying to do was run some jar file, right? What were we doing again?
Just running some jar file. This one says that, kubeadmin does manual setup. Full control, though, which is almost always the part I bump into. Ties into that other thing we had on our topic list about vendor-driven churn. Vendor-driven churn being things like, they bumped your version of your whatever it is you need to support. And so now, without a lot of wiggle room, you've got to move into the next piece there, in an unexpected time. I think one of the benefits if you're building your own crap, and you're working at like the lower level piece, you don't have a framework that moves a whole lot out from under you. The most recent one I have to do some finger wagging with was a project I observed that was making an attempt to adopt React. But early on in the React, and there was not really like a super hard demand for this multi-developer kinds of feature sets and those benefits that React made promises about. You don't need that on a small team, and you don't have this fancy, super awesome, real-time dynamic something or other that has this complicated, even page state to maintain. Never minding the fact that the back end of the app is like some legacy, two different implementations of some legacy stuff, one of which is still like a Perl script, which I love. Perl CGI, it's still running, it's still getting the job done, but Now you've decided to adopt React because it was cool, and then you ran into some little issue that everybody was running into because you were so early, and now you had to go from 13 to 15 to 17, and there were, breaking changes, so you end up rewriting a bunch of stuff. It's sort of easy to pick on that example because, sort of anybody adopting something early runs into that. That's not new and fancy, but even if you pick something that's more mature, another group I was advising had a dev team that already had loads of PHP experience. So they're going to build a new app for this dude, prototyping some stuff out. They decide, hey, we're going to do Laravel 10. Laravel 10 is great. Laravel 11 is now released, and I'm doing the finger wagging saying, hey, just stick on 10. It's not like it's EOL. It's not like it has like this terrible gaping security hole, knock on wood, that we know about, that, there's not a security patch requirement on this one. And yes, it's better for reasons, but those are all hard to measure, and you can keep going on 10 right now and then maybe just land at 12 or something.
Balancing that investment, right? Because every piece of software you pick is an investment. You have a long tail investment in that goes into managing it and everything else.
Right.
But we have to, what are we trying to do right now? If we're trying to get a product out the door, if we're trying to figure out, do we even have product market fit? Maybe we don't need to upgrade. We don't need to worry about that, because let's do that when we might throw this out next week.
Listen, let's just call it tech debt and move on.
Right. Yep.
Let's call it tech debt.
Exactly.
Move on. I read something funny on the internet. The new cool name for tech debt is, you just call it founder code. And it's like, oh, okay, it's the early team who's building this stuff.
The thing I always tell companies is that on day 0, you have no tech debt. On day 1, 100% of what you wrote is tech debt. On day 2, 100% of what you wrote is tech debt. It's all tech debt. If you're building it, you're creating tech debt. The question is, when do you reinvest in that? And when you reinvest in that should be somewhere aligned with, when did we start making revenue? Because our cost of doing business goes up when we start making revenue, because we can spend money on places, and we should spend money on places. You're muted. I'm muted? No, you're muted.
Oh, I am. Yeah. So this is that article you're talking about, the 300% production problem, 200%. Now it's 300%, because the app, the deployment target, and the deployment methodology.
And
so I do
one of those things is scaling infinitely.
I mean, winding all of this back and talking about tech debt too, there is a significant number of operations that never, ever, ever have to worry about some of these massive scaling problems that a lot of this infrastructure was designed to maintain. So winding this back to, some other little startup-y ideas that you can run, little web apps and things like this, and you want to avoid the 300% problem of learning tool A, B, C, D, E, again, with, it increases your burden at some geometric rate. You can still find the stuff that you can, you could deploy all of your stuff on a single node and then run forever. And then for any of the build versus buy stuff, you always just build your own. I know another person, Agent H, is ever so firmly in the camp of build your own. Never move to cloud. I'm going to just not build on my own data center, but I'm buying a rack in a good data center and I'm filling my gear in there. And I'm buying a rack in another data center and I'm filling my gear in there. and I'm doing my stuff, automated deployments, but it's not Kubernetes or Terraform or magic sauce at this point. It started off
But what's his
20 something years ago with like, well, here's how we would do these automated deployments now.
but his business
Like
plan?
inched forward, year by year.
What's his business plan, right? How does that align with his business plan? His business plan should have some expectations of growth in it, right?
Yeah, they process information in the finance space.
So he can define upfront how big his operation needs to be. He's not going to pick up new customers every day, right? Where are all his
there is not any kind of exponential growth that happens in that space.
Yep.
Right.
So he can say, okay, we start out here. Tomorrow we pick up another customer. It adds a little bit to us. We're going to pick up a customer a year.
When they scale, like they buy some beefy hardware that they're over provisioning, they say, everybody says that, and it's a reasonably good server that you can purchase, couple thousands of dollars, put this in there. You've got the tools already because they started the investment on this infrastructure 20 years ago. Again, opted not to, I'll just buy a managed hosting.
They've already designed and built a framework for managing these things.
Yeah, piece by piece.
Yeah.
It started off as like, we got a new server. The process is ship it to our facility here. We put it on our test network. We get it all dialed in, ship it to the data center, because you don't go there to do that because the data center is not in your town, right? You're in Seattle and the data center is somewhere in Eastern Washington. And then your other data center is like Chicago or Denver or something. And then you would provision the thing and ship it over there. And then they plug it in and they turn it on. And you're like, okay, cool. Maybe it's connected to your IPMI Kajigger. When you buy this rack or half rack or something, you have to buy the full one if you want a cage around it, and you want a cage around it because you're doing finance crap. You got to put your own router at the top. You got to put your own, local switch, whatever quality you want to put at the top there. Put your own little back end network and all of that stuff you're doing. Or putting that hardware in, and some of the data centers will have somebody who's like, I'm familiar with like Cisco iOS. I'll provision your router for you.
Now let's take that team and put them in a new context, right? We take that same team out of the business that they're in. The business folded for some reason. It's done, right? They've lost all their IP. They start a new business. How many years is it going to take for them to rebuild all of that? They don't have any of the code.
Well, I think that's where you would just like,
and that's why we start today. We start today with buy, and we just use cloud because we can get that started in 5 minutes instead of buy hardware, wait a couple of weeks, ship it, provision it, get an OS installed remotely, get routers installed, do all that stuff.
Oh yeah,
and that's because we can. 20 years ago, we couldn't. And so that was the default cost of doing business. Now we don't have that, right? We actually would still start, even then, we would start by people would build things on the local and get it running, get some things going, right? While we are building out the infrastructure for it. But we don't need that baseline infrastructure. We don't need to start, we need to buy 5 pieces of hardware. We can just throw it on one EC2 instance and see what happens.
I mean, there's a lot of folks that, we're saying build versus buy, and how does AI maybe help move that towards a little bit of like build your own for a bunch of the stuff, where maybe the baseline of what you have to build is definitely moved up. Don't buy hardware in a rack, just buy generic Linux server nodes in whatever provider you feel like. Scatter them across Oracle and Google and Amazon and Akamai.
20 years ago, our developers are sitting together in a room, hashing out the ideas, figuring out what they're going to do. They're frameworking and wireframing and doing all the things to come up with the basic scaffolding of the application they're going to start building, right? And then
Right.
figuring out how to solve the business problem they're trying to solve with that software. Today, and so during that time, our operations guys can start ordering hardware, figuring out what the infrastructure is going to look like, where our scaling points might be, right? Buying hardware based on best estimates of what that's going to be. But today, all of that has been compressed because we have tools that manage that. We have distributed teams that are working in many different places using different tools. And then now, and that was 5 years ago, right? Now, those teams are one person using AI to generate their wireframes, to generate their mock-ups, come up with, and then generate code from those mock-ups. And so by day 2, we're expected to have something for them to run this on. It's not longer 3 months or even 6 weeks. It's like 2 days. But they can do it themselves. They don't need us to do it. Because that same tooling can give them just enough to get that product out to market without having to worry about, and then if they're doing it in cloud, then at least they have the expectation that they can bring somebody in behind them to help them figure out and fix the thing that they built that shouldn't have ever existed.
Yeah, there's a lot of I don't know if there's a lot. I've heard more than one horror story of a poorly implemented, for lack of better terminology, or poorly implemented Amazon setup that maybe is costly because you have too much in the Amazon space. And so you're, just paying for the service itself too much of, but also it's very messy the way that it's rigged together, because we had folks that decided, I don't need to hire a consultant to help me design my stuff, and I can figure this out with AI, but I'm working my way through the 300% problem here. And, I thought this was the right way to do, the private networking between my nodes in Amazon and my RDS and my Elasticache and my something and my something. And then I thought, I had to do this and with S3. And then I decided to do this other weird thing with it. And then you have somebody else slide in later who's just an expert on Amazon and AWS infrastructure, looks at your stuff and is like, what a mess here. Now we have.
It was the same in data centers, right? I mean, we come in and follow up behind what a team had built, and you're really trying to not be accusatory and be like, what is this pile of shit you built? Because we need to fix this now. Because usually by the time they would bring someone in, it's already on fire, right? They've lit money on fire. They've lit servers on fire. It's just exploding. And then they're like, let's hire someone and make it their responsibility. and it's, I hate to say, it's still actually the right answer, because until you can generate the revenue, it's not worth making that early investment. If you can start a business where you already start with revenue, great, right? Let's start the investment early. But
that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Just get money.
Yeah. Start with a business that already has customers, that already has money coming in. Then we can do it the right way from the ground up. Otherwise, building the pile of shit first, getting customers to spend money with you, but know this up front. Know you're doing this, though, right? Know you're making that build versus buy decision, because you could buy Datadog, but you've decided to implement your own API and you're stacking some, or you're all what an API, APM. So you've got some Loki and some Prometheus and some this and that, and I don't even know what the open source. You're doing open source.
Grafana on there too,
right? Grafana, and you're scaling all these little things, but they're only having to scale a little bit. You only had to build them once. You don't really know how they all work, but you did get them working together. Then you start making money, and you have to realize that, like, the time invested in maintaining that now, because it's critical. You probably did one of the classic interesting decisions of taking some metrics that you were storing in Grafana that you were using internally and exposing those metrics, maybe even the graph, to your users, which meant your entire Grafana stack became production. I mean, customer-facing production. And you're like, now how do we scale this? You don't. That wasn't what it was built for. But
now you take a step back.
yeah, you have to take that step back. So recognize it when you're building the business. Recognize when you're making the early build decisions that you may need to revisit them constantly. Same thing when you make a buy decision. You say, we're going to jump in and we're going to pay GitLab because GitLab's hosted service gives us the thing, and we're doing it at their free tier, so we didn't have to pay it for anything. And then you turn around and you've crossed that threshold, and now it's $19 a user a month. And you're like, well, that's a lot of money. We could host our own GitLab. So maybe you pull it in-house. And then you realize that getting people to manage that stack is expensive. Maybe we should go to GitHub where we can spend half as much money and get the same thing. But it's still all transition work, right?
I would say that hosting your own GitLab is not terribly difficult, though.
It's not terribly difficult at a certain scale.
Roll your own thing. And yeah, so if you're
you remember the story of Mercedes, right? So Mercedes rolled out GitLab internally, and they just used default configs, which meant that all of the repos were public. They thought it was private because it was inside their own GitLab. Nobody looked at the configs. And then they accused GitLab and said that it's GitLab's fault that all their data got exploited and their code got shared.
Sort of buried, maybe.
I'm pretty sure it was Mercedes, and they accused GitLab and said it was their fault and their default configs need to change. But they picked up a product, hosted it themselves, and didn't understand that this was a product built for public and private repositories. If you wanted to make everything private, you needed to check config.
2020. So that went down in 2020. Pulled down there. Put their GitLab. I mean, the lead on the article says misconfigured GitLab.
It was default config. Yeah, it was. It was 100%. It was just misconfigured.
Some access control something or something. Interesting.
Well, I mean, there you go. That's part of your 300%. You pick it
on, and now
if they'd used the paid hosted GitLab, then someone have already made those decisions, and all you had the clear, obvious distinction between public and private.
I mean, at a company that size, if you were going to be doing a GitLab deployment or something, and you're going to be paying them, and you have how many users that need access to the GitLab instance? Let's pick an easy number, 2,000. I feel like you might even have like access to tools and feature sets from their support team, account rep, email, direct phone number to somebody.
But then again, going through acquisitions and getting a product purchased and all of that is so much harder than spinning it up in your own data center. And without support, without anything, right? Just we can turn it on.
Just run the Docker thing, man, and put traffic in front of it.
Right, exactly. And then you're like, well, we didn't even think about where we were going to store persistent data. I still love people that run databases in Docker and don't
do the volume
about the part of where the data is stored, right? Running databases inside Kubernetes is a perfect example. They don't think about where that data is stored. They're like, well, it's just in the cluster, and
stored in the cluster,
right? And then next thing you know, something happens and they've lost their database. You got to understand how it all works, please.
Well, you had to put in your, we didn't ask the the chat robot about it, but, we had that conversation with it about this thing, Kubernetes and something. keep the backups on a rsync.net. Why not? I love rsync.net. Those folks have some like fun technical blog posts, just like, yeah. Wonder why it says AWS S3 is recommended.
Because it has the most buckets with the most unencrypted publicly accessible buckets of your data. Didn't they just change it so that I think S3 finally changed it so the default mode for a bucket is not public, it's now private.
I think that was ages ago, man.
It was relatively recent, and there's still tons and tons and tons of data out there that's public that should have been private.
Make some cron job, YAML. This is all the stuff we want to do, right? Why? I do want to know why it recommended AWS, but then give me the step-by-step so I can test all of my own magic cube deployment now, so that I can replace checking a box for AWS, RDS, multi-AZ, you know, taking my database cost from, you know, $12,000 down to $6,000.
And how many man hours do you spend implementing it and maintaining the solution?
Well, so far I've spent. Agent J already knew a lot of the stuff, right? Yep. So now it was just have me go faster on my build stuff. I know how to evaluate a buy decision. We've already made that. We are trying to figure out how to use more lower level optimization. One of the objectives was not having the vendor lock in. So RDS is objectively a vendor lock-in.
Absolutely.
You've chosen the Google one or the Oracle one or whoever's, right? So they want to be able to move around, not because they're sensitive to like price shopping or any of that other stuff. It's just a resiliency choice they want to make. And so moving out of, oh, well, we have to use Elasticache. No. Now we just spin up a node, and that's our Redis implementation node, and our whole little infrastructure knows it. Move it around, destroy it when we need to. Let's just make another one. All of you guys use the new one. Everybody kind of stop using that one, and then we'll feel like it's empty, and then we'll just nuke.
That usually usually when that happens, of course, is when you discover how many people use their cache as a database.
Well, that is a different problem, and whether or not you are outsourcing some of that management to Elasticache in AWS or doing your own Redis nodes that you move around, misusing, air quotes, misusing the Redis is a different problem. And also you can, why don't you just have your Kubernetes, add another Kubernetes cron job that backs up your Redis or something like that. You know, it seems to have done pretty okay for this one here. Right, this is, where's the question I asked already? Oh, why AWS? Highly reliable, highly available, scalable, cheap. That said, Cloudflare R2 is a great low-cost alternative. And rsync.net is better for privacy-focused offsite backups. Okay, well, to each their own. Here's how to do your own local kube cluster with kind, PG deployment, backup and verification scripts. This is some boring shit to install the thing. Here's your deployment, the larger deployment. probably want to set those passwords somewhere. Cube apply, do the thing, do the thing, do the thing. And then what is this one? Oh, that's
there's another part of this, and that's okay. So if we wanted to do this once,
work, man.
we wanted to do this once, then we can invest and do all this work. But what if we need to do it twice or 5 times? Or we decided to silo every single customer. And so how many times do we have to recreate this and build this? How much do we have to invest in making this automated so we get consistent process? Or do we just go with manual and hope we get consistency through manual process?
Well, in Agent J's circumstance, and they were building this stuff out, I guess they had to do this. They didn't end up having to do another problem, but they did move things in a more like gradual way.
Right. They built one place, then they started to replace that tooling, investing in the slow process of learning it, building it, making it something they could maintain, and migrating to it.
Correct. But also, unfair advantage there is that that Agent J is not a startup founder CTO who's trying to do 8 different things that are 8 different roles. He's already at a larger organization. He's on the SRE team. He's on this. He's already spent loads of times in the Google console, in the AWS console, writing other management scripts with shells that run on your own infrastructure that monitors stuff, various YAMLs from various tools, the Terraform thing. So it's his day job. He's looking at, I see, I understand what is going on in this log. I'm not trying this from scratch with no knowledge and then running into a confounding arcane error message in a completely new domain. That's
he expects his day job is to manage and maintain this thing. It's not a ancillary part of his job. It's the thing. It is his job.
Oh yeah.
And so he's like, this is my job. This is my career. I'm going to spend the next 5 years working on this, maintaining it, managing it. Eventually this knowledge will get transferred to more of the team. More of the team will take ownership of this. And we as a team will manage and own this for the life of the company or the life of this particular piece of the product.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, that's mostly it.
Yeah.
Again, like if you're the small startup, right? Build yourself use Express.js or whatever framework you think is cool, right? Laravel or Django or Express, or is Express the Node one or the Go one? I don't know. But pick one of those things for your favorite stack, ship it on a single EC2 node, and at your first scaling problem, just double the size of the node. And and it's all running on that one box, and that box is persistent. So you can solve your backup and store my database problem later. You can run your Redis and your DB and your app all on the one box, probably for like your first 1,000 clients, depending on what you're doing, right?
Yeah, how you scale with clients, yeah.
The cannabis software that I do, it's very, very niche. But even the data sets for those largest clients is not terabytes and terabytes of data. I think there's some nervousness. Somebody else I'm chatting with right now, there's some nervousness about, well, what if we need to get big all of a sudden? Which is such a not the problem that you're really going to have, right? And the way that get big all of a sudden thing happens is like it's an exponential kind of thing when it occurs. So you have to get big all of a sudden, very, very slowly, and then sort of like all at once. Yep. And now you're already focused on what am I going to do when I have 100,000 users? Hey, why don't you worry about getting 100 users or 1,000 users or something along those lines? Anyway, all the way back, one more point for just build it yourself, because you can end up saving loads of money. I know we had talked about some other things you could do that with, and possibly avoid some vendor-driven churn. But I think maybe in like 2000 and ages ago, definitely by 2013, my phone system, I plugged it into Twilio. And I had another small business phone provider that was costing me some number of dollars. And I'm pretty good with writing code, and I have some experience with telephony in the asterisk and free switch kind of space, and I've coded systems against that. Then I was like, I'm going to move my business phone. I'll move it over to Twilio, because now it only costs me $1 a month for the phone number, which I think it might be $1.20 now. I don't know. Trivial is my point. Because the other phone service was like, we'll do your thing with an IVR, with some open hours, with some stuff, some feature sets, hunt group, blah, blah, blah. And it's minimum like 40 a month or something. So no, I'll move over to Twilio, again, with my unfair advantage of prior experience with telephony and making web apps to making a system that can store a little bit of state and respond with XML. Come on, dude. I'm like, no AI in 2013 for this. Good documentation from Twilio and a little bit of a test playground on a test phone number. Called that phone number. I got a service running on, my site. It's like 4 or 5 scripts. I just threw some PHP, still running Apache pre-fork on that old box, and some PHP endpoints for Twilio to hit. Logs my status, gets my transcript, shoots me an email from messages, keeps my open hours. And that was code we opted to move away from a buy the solution into a just build your own solution. And also the scalability of it is not really my problem. I didn't build my own telephony infrastructure. I'm using Twilio. But I built my own IVR, which Twilio made very easy, and this and this. And now on months that I have low traffic on the phone, you still pay per minute, but every single month has been
right
way, 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 way less.
Build versus buy isn't an exclusive decision. You can build and buy at the same time.
Oh, you're always doing that anyway.
And that's a good example, right? That I'm going to buy from Twilio and build using their integration support to suit my specific needs. Because you could have gotten the telephone line from the, plugged it into Asterix, done all the things, but you didn't want to do that. That's too far, right?
Well, I'd done that before for,
right.
In a different role. You gotta be ready to do a lots. You want to talk about plus 300% knowledge. I feel like some of that telephony stuff at that level would be like plus 500% knowledge.
Right.
And I'm not ready for that.
Yep.
Cool. I think that settles it. Case by case basis every single time, huh?
Yeah, it really is, right? It's your team, it's your people, it's your time. Is your time free? Is your people's time free? If it is, because sometimes it is, or that's because, for all the reasons, then invest that time. If it's not, then maybe it's the other, or maybe it's a combination.
No easy answers.
Nope.
Cool. Until next time.
Cool.